Chief of Staff James Ashby. I'm a bit fired up today, guys, so you might have to moderate my opinion, but welcome to you both. Can I kick it off with this?
Okay,
the big story of the day is Vladimir. I'm not holding back, Holly. You know I don't do that well. Anyway, I want to get on to Putin. Here's what he had to say today. Have a listen.
If there is a threat to the territorial integrity of our country and for protecting our people, we will certainly use all the means available to us. And I'm not bluffing. Russian citizens can be certain that the territorial integrity of our motherland, our freedom and independence shall be secured. I shall stress by all means available to us.
Okay, Holly, is this desperation from Putin, or is it a case that after his meeting with Xi last week, he's prepared to deliberately challenge the West, that he knows something that we don't know?
I think we're seeing at the moment a really, really scary time in the world. We have Putin, who thought he was going to overtake Ukraine in a couple of days, and clearly that is not what has eventuated, and he's been backed into a corner and potentially an embarrassing situation for him, where he is looking where he can potentially still claim some form of victory, or potentially still looking to claim a total victory over Ukraine. You have China still looking to assert itself. You still have Iran trying to push its way through, particularly through the Middle East. And you have a West, if you look at particularly under President Biden and some others who are perhaps not showing the strength in leadership they have in the past, but particularly a society who's more interested in pronouns than perhaps what strength they should be showing when it comes to looking at these powers. Now, Iran, China, Russia, not necessarily great friends in the past, but as we know, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And whilst the West is sitting around looking at their naval and how they are dealing with a number of societal issues, I think these guys are looking at the rest of us thinking, what are they doing? We're going to have a great time. And the world's in a whole world of pain potentially going forward. I don't think we can take this lightly. I don't think we can think he is bluffing. I think the threat of nuclear use, I think we could be really looking at this very, very serious situation here, and it's not something to make light of.
It's incredibly chilling to think that we've been brought to this brink, and when I think there were opportunities for peace previously. But James, my reading of this is that Putin's trying to put some pressure on the West to accept these upcoming referendums for the contested territories. If they don't do it, if the West doesn't accept the referendum result, it countermands the international law I spoke about earlier. It goes against what happened in Kosovo. So what's your view? Should the West abide by the referendum results?
Well, I think it goes further than that, Corey. The reality is Putin is running out of troops. He is starved of young men, fit men that are willing to go to the front line and defend this ideal or this idea that Putin has, that he has sovereign right over Ukraine. The reality is he's run out of troops. He's even gone to the 26,000 prisoners in his country and offered them a free get-out-of-jail card if you go and defend Russia in another country. Those men who have realised on the front line that they're fighting the wrong war, who've tried to back out, have been shot in the back. So he's fast running out of people that are willing to go to the front line, and he doesn't want to go down the path of conscription. The reality is the world is hurting right now as a result. I think if you asked most Australians 12 months ago what Russia exported, most people would have probably said vodka. The reality is they are a massive producer of oil, coal, gas and other essential minerals across the globe, but mainly coal, gas and oil. And that's why we're paying high prices for diesel, petrol. That's why gas prices here have gone up, and consequently electricity prices as well. So I think his last result here is, or his only option, he thinks, is to press the big red button, or at least threaten it.
Well, and they're also heading into a European winter, so...
Sure.
Yeah, that'll put pressure on the European countries as well. Holly, you made a mention in your comments earlier that the West appears weak, and you specifically identified Joe Biden as president. I mean, who couldn't feel safe with this man at the wheel? Have a look at this. Okay, this is the exact same thing he did last week. Have another look. James, I shouldn't be laughing, but it's clear that Biden is simply not up to the job of being US president, is he?
No, and thankfully he won't be on the front line if the troops of America are forced into any war. Look, my grandfather suffers dementia, and he has more cognitive ability than what Biden does. Speaking to a nurse in a dementia ward, she said, you know, dementia patients will often take a piddle in the corner of their room, and I was just waiting for that moment where Biden took a piddle on the corner of that stage. The man clearly doesn't have the cognitive ability to run a country like the US.
Look, it's starting to look like almost elder abuse.
Terrible image for me. It does a little
almost
bit,
like
actually.
elder
And when
abuse.
you think, Holly, that he's already... Yeah, I agree. And he's already botched the withdrawal from Afghanistan. His enemies know this. I mean, it does make America look very weak. So who's actually going to be making the decisions, you think, if tensions escalate and it draws other nations into this conflict?
Well, Kamala Harris likes to read storybooks to preschool children. I don't know, is that who's going to step up? I mean, it's a very, very frightening time, I think, for the US government when you look at who's in charge over there. We've got the midterms coming up. We'll see what happens and what it looks like at the end of it. But the West certainly seems to have a very different priority and focus, other than if you look at particularly those powers now. If you look at Iran, if you look at China, if you look at Russia, and I suppose you can include North Korea in that, and where they're focused.
Yeah, very true. And you mentioned Kamala Harris reading to school children, but what about Aussie kids? Have a look at who their teachers are going to be. I mean, in this country, you can barely get an ATAR above 50 and still study to be a teacher. I mean, the cut-off for a Bachelor of Education degree at University of Newcastle is something like 53 and a bit. Secondary teaching at University of Canberra is 54 and a half. Let's remind everyone, the top score possible is 99.95. So basically half of that to qualify for teaching our kids. Holly, what hope do our kids have if our teachers can't even or can barely scrape through their ATAR?
Well, and it's not only the teachers that are teaching it if they're barely scraping through their ATAR and struggling with numeracy and literacy themselves, but the curriculum that they're being confronted with that they've got to teach as well just doesn't make any sense in many, many ways, and is ridiculous in itself in the complexity. We've moved away from teaching kids about basic numeracy and literacy. We're now so insistent on teaching them a number of woke sort of policy agendas. I can feel an Insider's cartoon coming on now if I refer to it as Marxism again, but we know that's what's overtaking the education system and the curriculum that's being taught, but particularly being put together. The universities are certainly putting through that sort of ethos through all of their courses. It's not about what's coming out at the other end. I know when I went to university, a lot of going to university wasn't actually about what you were learning, but was about teaching you to find information, to teach you how to learn, how to find information, how to bring that information together in the way that you needed to. And I'm just not sure universities are teaching that sort of ability to think anymore for yourself, to actually bring information together, to create an argument, to argue the opposite side of a point. I'm just not quite sure universities are teaching those things anymore. They're now sort of just wanting to kind of carbon copy people out that agree with their left-wing lecturers.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And James, as Holly was talking, it gave me this idea that just maybe these teachers are going to be too dumb to properly indoctrinate our kids with this leftist propaganda. Maybe it's actually a good thing. What do you reckon?
Well, I don't know about that, Corey. I'm glad you put it into perspective, because a lot of people, a lot of viewers in our demographic and older wouldn't know what an ATAR is. Back when I was at high school, it was an OP, and I think other people older than us would have had a different system altogether. But putting it back into context again, a 53 is about a C minus if you do the equations there. And there is nothing more frustrating to me when, if you think about what a C grade student is, it's a person that doesn't know the difference between their two twos and twos, or their there and theirs, and they can't use them appropriately. That's, look, a bugbear of mine, I get it. But if we're to have educators out there teaching our kids, we want to get the basics right. You can see why there's been an increase in homeschooling. I hate saying it, but I think parents at home are sometimes doing a better job than teachers. And not to mention, there is a difficulty, especially where I am here in Yeppoon. I was talking to a teacher last weekend who's got a job here at one of the local private schools. It was his one and only option that he put down straight out of university. Thankfully, he's a clever fella, and I think he does know the difference between his there and theirs. But he was saying to me over the weekend, we just can't get teachers into regional parts of our country. And Yeppoon's a great spot. Live on the beach, you're only an hour's flight from Brisbane or 6-hour drive. So these are the other difficulties we face in our education system, and the biggest sufferers are the future generations.
Yeah, before I have to let you both go, I've got to say that a good teacher can play a critical role in a child's life, whether to encourage them in learning, to help them through difficult periods that perhaps their parents can't. They're just wonderful, but by goodness, we've got to get some decent talent attracted there. Hey, Holly, before I do let you both go, the Liberals have said in New South Wales they're not going to follow the Labor Party booze ban, because there's no drinking for Labor MPs in Parliament during sitting weeks. What's wrong with at the end of a sitting day or having a meal and a glass of wine of an evening in Parliament House? Have they lost any control of themselves?
Look, I think this might be the Labor Party in New South Wales trying to find a silver shining thing to look over there. We saw just this week one of the Labor members making a rather interesting speech about one of their incoming upper house members being very much tied to Eddie Obeid still allegedly, that the tentacles of the Obeid corruption scandals apparently are still very deep running within the New South Wales Labor Party, that there are still very, very deep ties to those old days that saw them booted out of government in 2011 that Chris Minns certainly doesn't want resurfacing and is desperately trying to find things to say, look over here, aren't we doing things differently? I'm not quite sure it's got anything to do with having a glass of wine in the members' dining room at the end of a sitting day, but probably more to do with trying to make sure no one's looking at the 2011 and the Audi bags of cash and Eddie Obeid and everything else that happened prior to them losing government in 2011.
Somehow I think there'll be many New South Wales Liberals pointing in that direction for the next few months. Okay, I've got to say thank you to you both. James Ashby, Holly Hughes, really appreciate your time and joining me on Paul Murray Live tonight.